I wasn't supposed to survive that night. I know how that sounds, and trust me, I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't been there. But when you're trapped in a ravine with two dogmen closing in, no way out, nowhere to run, and you're counting seconds instead of auctions, the word unlikely stops meaning anything. I was done. That's the truth. The only reason I'm still here is because something else stepped in, something I never thought existed, let alone would get between me and them. A Bigfoot. Right there in the dark, changing the outcome of something that was already decided. What happened in those woods rewired how I understand the world. What lives out there, and how close we really are to things we pretend don't exist. And before you write this off or decide I'm exaggerating, just know this. I'm not telling this because I want attention. I'm telling it because if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't be alive to say any of this. So before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I've been hunting the backcountry of northern Idaho for close to 15 years now. Started when I was in my early 20s, taught myself everything from books and trial and error. Got my first buck when I was 23 years old, and from that point on I was hooked. There's something about being out in the wilderness, miles from civilization, relying on your own skills and knowledge to track and harvest game. It clears your head in a way nothing else can, makes you feel connected to something older and more fundamental than the modern world. I hunt alone most of the time. Always have. Some guys like going out with a group, making it a social thing with their buddies, but that never appealed to me. I prefer the solitude, the quiet, the chance to really tune in to what the forest is telling you. When you're by yourself, you notice things you'd miss with other people around, the way the wind shifts, the pattern birds make when they're disturbed, small details that can mean the difference between coming home with meat and going home empty-handed. This particular hunt was planned for late October, right when elk season peaks in that region. I'd been scouting an area about 30 miles northeast of Coeur d'Alene for a few weeks, had found some promising sign. Fresh rubs on trees, where bulls had been scraping the velvet off their antlers. Tracks in the mud near water sources, droppings that looked recent. Everything pointed to a decent population of elk moving through the area, and I figured if I could get in there during the rut, I'd have a good shot at a mature bull. The forecast was calling for clear weather, temperatures in the 40s during the day and dropping down into the 20s at night. Perfect hunting conditions. Cold enough that the elk would be active and moving, but not so cold that you'd freeze your ass off sitting in a stand for hours. Packed light like I always do when I'm hunting solo. Just the essentials. My rifle, a Remington 700 in .3006 that I've been using for years and trust completely. Ammunition, obviously. Basic camping gear, including a lightweight tent, sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, and a small backpacking stove. Enough freeze-dried food for 4 days, water filtration system, first aid kit, headlamp with extra batteries. Standard stuff for anyone who spends time in the backcountry. I drove out to the trailhead before dawn on a Thursday morning, parked my truck in the small dirt lot, shouldered my pack, and headed into the woods just as the sky was starting to lighten in the east. The air was crisp and still, that perfect early morning quiet when the nocturnal animals have bedded down, but the day shift hasn't woken up yet. My breath came out in small clouds as I walked, boots crunching softly on the trail. The first 2 days went exactly like I'd hoped. I covered maybe 6 or 7 miles that first day, working my way deeper into the backcountry, stopping every hour or so to glass the ridges and valleys with my binoculars. Spotted a few cow elk on the second day, which told me I was in the right area, but no bulls yet. Set up my camp in a small clearing near a creek, somewhere flat enough to pitch the tent and with good access to water. On the evening of the second day, I finally spotted what I'd come for. A 6-point bull elk, probably weighing 700 or 800 pounds, feeding in a meadow about 400 yards away. Beautiful animal. Dark coat already thick for winter, massive rack that would look impressive mounted on any wall. He was too far for a clean shot, and the light was starting to fade, so I marked the location mentally and decided to come back the next morning. If he was using that meadow for feeding, there was a good chance he'd return. That night, something changed. I woke up around 2 in the morning to a sound I'd never heard before in all my years of hunting. It started as a howl, but not like any coyote or wolf I'd ever encountered. This was deeper, more powerful, with this strange quality that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The sound carried through the forest, echoing off the ridges, and it had this almost human quality to it, like someone was screaming and howling at the same time. I sat up in my tent, completely still, listening hard. The howl came again, from a different direction this time. Then another one answered it, and this one was closer, much closer, maybe a quarter-mile away at most. Then I heard a third howl, and this one couldn't have been more than a few hundred yards from my camp. Whatever was making these sounds, there were at least 3 of them, and they were communicating with each other, coordinating somehow. I stayed in my tent, not moving, barely breathing. My rifle was right next to me, loaded with a round in the chamber like always, safety on. I put my hand on it, just for the reassurance of having it nearby. The howling continued for maybe 10 minutes, these calls going back and forth between the 3 sources. Then they stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest. No wind, no night birds, nothing. Just dead quiet. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just sat there in my sleeping bag, rifle across my lap, listening to the darkness. When dawn finally came, I packed up my camp faster than I ever had before. Something about those sounds had gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't shake. My rational mind said they were probably just wolves, or maybe coyotes, their calls distorted by the terrain and the darkness. But my gut was telling me something different. My gut was saying those sounds came from something I didn't want to meet. But I didn't leave. I'd driven 3 hours to get here, hiked miles into the backcountry, and I'd finally found the bull I'd been looking for. I wasn't about to let some weird animal sounds chase me off. I told myself I was being paranoid, that spending too much time alone in the woods was making me jumpy. So I shouldered my pack and headed toward the meadow where I'd seen the elk the evening before. That's when I found the first track. I was following a game trail through a section of heavy timber, watching where I placed my feet so I wouldn't snap any branches or make unnecessary noise, when I noticed something pressed into a patch of soft earth next to the trail. At first, I thought it was a bear print. The size was about right, maybe 12 or 13 inches long and 7 or 8 inches wide. But when I knelt down to look closer, the shape was all wrong. This print looked like a canine paw, like what you'd see from a wolf or a large dog. But no wolf or dog has feet this big. The pad was massive, and the claw marks were deep and prominent, each one maybe 2 inches long. What really caught my attention was the shape. This print was more elongated than a bear's would be, more like a canine print, but scaled up to a size that shouldn't exist. I pulled out my knife and laid it next to the print for scale. The print was longer than my knife, and my knife has an 8-inch blade. I followed the trail of prints for maybe 20 yards. They were spaced far apart, showing whatever made them had been moving at a walk, with a stride much longer than any normal canine. The tracks led off the game trail and disappeared into thicker brush, where the ground was too rocky to show clear prints. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what could have made tracks like that. The only thing that came to mind was maybe a wolf with some kind of gigantism, but that seemed impossible. Wolves don't get that big. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of the clearest print, using my knife for scale. Looking at them on the small screen didn't make things any clearer. The print was definitely canine in structure, but the size was all wrong. I sent the photos to a buddy of mine who works for Fish and Wildlife, figuring he might have some insight. I didn't expect to get a response out here since cell service is practically non-existent, but I figured I'd send them while I had even one bar of signal. I kept examining the area around the tracks, looking for any other sign of what had passed through. There were some broken branches at about chest height, snapped clean off rather than torn. That suggested something moving through with considerable force, not caring about making noise or leaving evidence. I found a tuft of dark fur, caught on a low branch, coarse and thick. I bagged it, thinking maybe it could be identified later if I made it to a wildlife lab. The more I looked, the more disturbed I became. There were scratch marks on several trees, deep gouges in the bark that started about 5 feet up and extended down to ground level. The marks were made by something with claws strong enough to dig through thick bark and into the wood underneath. Each scratch was maybe half an inch wide, and the sets came in groups of 4, like 4 fingers or toes had raked down the tree trunk. I should have turned around right then. Should have packed up and hiked straight back to my truck. But I didn't. I convinced myself it was just some weird anomaly. Maybe prints from 2 different animals overlapping in a way that made them look larger and stranger than they really were. Or maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the early morning light. So I kept going, kept moving toward that meadow where the bull elk had been feeding. The elk was there, just like I'd hoped. He was in almost the exact same spot as the evening before, grazing on the grass at the edge of the meadow. The wind was in my favor, blowing from him toward me, so he didn't catch my scent. I found a good position behind a fallen log, about 200 yards out, got myself settled, and brought my rifle up. Through the scope I could see him clearly. Beautiful animal. This was going to be a clean shot. I spent a few minutes just watching him through my scope, waiting for him to turn broadside and give me a clear angle at his vitals. Good hunting ethics meant taking the best shot possible, not just any shot. The elk was completely calm, showing no signs of stress or awareness. He'd dip his head to graze, then lift it up to chew and scan the area. Normal behavior. The morning sun was hitting him just right, making his dark coat shine. Then something changed in his behavior. His ears suddenly swiveled forward, focusing on something across the meadow. His whole body went tense, muscles bunching under his coat. The grass he'd been chewing fell from his mouth. I watched through my scope as his nostrils flared, testing the air. Whatever he detected, it wasn't me. The wind was still blowing my scent away from him. This was something else. I was just starting to control my breathing, getting ready to squeeze the trigger when the elk's head snapped up. His whole body went rigid, ears forward, staring at something in the tree line on the far side of the meadow. Then he bolted, just took off running like something had lit a fire under him, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing into the forest. I kept my scope trained on the tree line where he'd been looking, trying to see what had spooked him. That's when I saw it. Movement in the shadows between the trees. Something large was standing there, just inside the forest edge where the sunlight hadn't penetrated yet. I couldn't make out details, but I could see the outline of something tall and upright. Too tall to be a bear on all fours, too broad to be a person. It stood there for maybe 5 seconds, perfectly still. Then it moved back into the deeper forest and vanished. My heart was pounding now. Whatever that thing was, it was big enough to spook a bull elk. Elk are tough animals, not easily frightened. For one to run like that, it had to have sensed a serious threat. I stayed behind my log, not moving, scanning the tree line with my rifle scope. Nothing else moved. No more sounds. Just the wind moving through the grass in the meadow. I waited there for maybe 20 minutes, watching, listening. When nothing else happened, I slowly stood up and started backing away from the meadow, keeping my rifle ready, not taking my eyes off the tree line. I made it maybe 50 yards back down the trail before I heard a branch snap somewhere off to my right. I froze, bringing my rifle up, aiming toward the sound. Nothing moved, No follow-up sounds. Just that one sharp crack of wood breaking. Then I heard it again, but this time it was behind me. Another branch breaking, deliberately this time, like something was stepping on it on purpose. I spun around, rifle at my shoulder, finger on the trigger guard. Still nothing visible. Just forest and shadows. But now I could smell something. A rank, musky odor that reminded me of wet dog, but stronger, more pungent. It was getting closer. I started moving faster, not quite running, but close to it. The trail I was following wound through thick timber, lots of fallen logs, and dense underbrush that made it hard to see more than 30 or 40 feet in any direction. I kept hearing sounds around me. Branches breaking, footsteps on leaves, that same musky smell getting stronger. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just following me. It was pacing me, moving parallel to my path, staying just out of sight in the heavy cover. Then a howl erupted from the forest to my left, so close and so loud that I actually stumbled and almost fell. It was that same sound from the night before, that deep, powerful howl with the human quality to it. Before the echo even died, another howl answered from my right. They had me flanked. 2 of them, one on each side, coordinating their movements, working together. That's when I knew I was being hunted. I ran. Didn't care about making noise anymore. Didn't care about staying on the trail. I just crashed through the forest, trying to put distance between me and whatever those things were. My pack bounced against my back. Tree branches whipped at my face, and I could hear them behind me now. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking, those howls cutting through the air. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like lead, but I kept pushing forward. I could hear them getting closer, their footsteps heavy and deliberate, moving faster than I could manage with a 40-pound pack on my back. I considered dropping the pack to move faster, but that would mean losing my supplies, my sleeping bag, everything I needed to survive if I got away from them. So I kept it on and kept running. Another howl erupted, this one so close I could hear the wet rasp of breath behind it. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw movement in the trees maybe 30 yards back. A dark shape moving between the trunks with incredible speed, staying low, using the cover of the undergrowth. It was pacing me easily, could have closed the distance if it wanted to, but instead it was hurting me, pushing me in a specific direction. That realization sent a fresh wave of fear through me. They weren't just chasing me. They were directing me somewhere, pushing me toward a specific location where maybe the terrain favored them, or where they had me at a disadvantage. I tried to change direction, angling to my left toward denser forest where the undergrowth might slow them down, but immediately that howl came from the left side, warning me off, telling me to stay on course. I tried going right and got the same response from that direction. They had me boxed in, hemmed in on 3 sides with only one direction to go. My only choice was to keep running forward or stop and try to fight. And I knew if I stopped, if I turned to face them, I'd be dead within seconds. At least running gave me a chance, however slim. So I kept moving forward, letting them herd me like livestock toward whatever they had planned. I broke out of the trees and found myself at the edge of a ravine. The ground dropped away steeply for maybe 20 feet, then leveled out into a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides. I didn't have time to think about it. I could hear them right behind me, closing fast. I jumped down into the ravine, half sliding and half falling down the loose dirt slope, somehow keeping my feet under me. When I hit the bottom, I spun around and brought my rifle up. That's when I finally saw them clearly. 2 massive creatures emerged from the tree line at the top of the ravine, standing upright on their hind legs like humans, but built completely wrong. They had to be 7 feet tall, maybe more, with broad, powerful shoulders and long arms that hung down past where their knees would be. Their bodies were covered in dark fur, thick and shaggy, with patches of gray around their faces and shoulders. But the heads were what made my blood run cold. They had canine features, long snouts, pointed ears that stood straight up, but their faces were too expressive, too intelligent looking to be just animals. They stood there at the edge of the ravine, looking down at me, and I could see their eyes. Yellow eyes that reflected light like a dog's would, but with something behind them that looked almost human. They weren't just looking at me with animal hunger. They were evaluating me, calculating. The one on the left was slightly larger than the other, probably the one that had been pacing me on that side. They both showed their teeth, and I could see massive fangs, easily 3 or 4 inches long, designed for tearing and killing. I had my rifle aimed right at the larger one's chest. My hands were shaking, but I had a clear shot. But I didn't fire. Something stopped me. Maybe it was the way they were looking at me, or maybe some instinct told me that firing would only make things worse. They could have jumped down after me already, but they hadn't. They were waiting for something, watching me. Then the larger one started climbing down into the ravine. It moved carefully, deliberately, never taking its eyes off me. The other one stayed up top, watching. When the first one reached the bottom, maybe 15 feet away from me, it stood up to its full height. It was massive up close. Had to be close to 7.5 feet tall, easily 300 pounds of muscle and fur and teeth. The smell coming off it was overpowering, that wet dog smell mixed with something wilder and more predatory. I kept my rifle trained on its chest, finger moving to the trigger. The creature took another step forward. I shouted at it, told it to stay back, knowing it probably couldn't understand, but hoping the tone would get through. It didn't stop. Took another step. Another. It was now maybe 10 feet away. I could see every detail of its face, the intelligence in those yellow eyes, the way its ears were tracking every sound I made. The second one started climbing down into the ravine. Now I had 2 of them, both coming toward me, both moving with that same deliberate, calculated pace. They were going to rush me together. I could feel it. I was about to pull the trigger, had already started to squeeze, when I heard something else. A deep, booming vocalization that echoed through the canyon, different from the howls. This was lower, more powerful, almost like a roar, but with this complex quality to it that suggested language rather than just noise. The 2 creatures froze. Both of them stopped moving and turned their heads toward the sound, which had come from somewhere up the canyon behind me. Another vocalization came, this one even louder, and now I could feel it in my chest like a physical vibration. The 2 creatures in front of me looked at each other, then back up toward the source of the sound. They seemed agitated now, shifting their weight from foot to foot, making low growling sounds in their throats. I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Something big was coming down the canyon, and I was caught between it and the 2 creatures in front of me. I didn't know which way to aim my rifle anymore. The footsteps got closer, closer. I could feel the impacts through the ground under my feet. Then a massive shape moved past me, actually brushing against my shoulder as it went by, and positioned itself between me and the 2 creatures. It was a Bigfoot, an actual Bigfoot, standing maybe 8.5 feet tall, covered in thick reddish-brown fur. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms hung down past its knees, and the head sat directly on those shoulders, with almost no neck visible. It stood on 2 legs like a human, but the proportions were all wrong, too tall, too broad, arms too long. It positioned itself directly in front of me, facing the 2 Dogman creatures, and made another one of those deep vocalizations. The Dogmen responded with their howls, but these sounded different now, more aggressive, more challenging. The Bigfoot stood its ground, not backing up, not advancing, just maintaining its position between me and them. It raised itself up even taller somehow, making itself look bigger, and let out a roar that was so loud and deep I felt it vibrating in my bones. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The 2 Dogmen responded with their own vocalizations, a chorus of howls and snarls that overlapped with each other. It was clear they were communicating, coordinating between themselves. The larger one took a step to the left, while the smaller one moved right, like they were trying to flank the Bigfoot. But the Bigfoot tracked both of them, keeping itself positioned in a way that neither could attack without being vulnerable to a counterstrike. I could see the muscles bunching under the Bigfoot's fur, could see the way it shifted its weight subtly from foot to foot, ready to move in any direction. This wasn't its first fight. You could see that in every movement, in the way it positioned itself, in the calculated nature of its stance. This creature had experience with combat, had fought before, and knew what it was doing. The smaller Dogman made a feint forward, testing the Bigfoot's reactions. The Bigfoot didn't fall for it, barely twitched in response, just kept its attention divided between both opponents, waiting for a real attack. The tension in the ravine was incredible. You could feel the violence about to explode, like pressure building before a thunderstorm breaks. The larger Dogman took a step forward, showing its teeth. The Bigfoot responded by taking a step forward of its own, and now I could see just how much bigger it was. The Dogmen were tall and powerful, but the Bigfoot dwarfed them. It had to outweigh them by at least 200 pounds, and every bit of that weight was muscle. The smaller Dogman started backing toward the ravine wall, but the larger one held its ground, clearly not wanting to back down. What happened next was so fast I almost couldn't process it. The larger Dogman lunged forward, going straight for the Bigfoot, with its jaws open wide. The Bigfoot moved like lightning for something that size, sidestepping the attack and bringing one massive arm around in a backhand strike that caught the Dogman in the side of the head. The impact sounded like a baseball bat hitting a side of beef. The Dogman literally left its feet, flying sideways to crash into the ravine wall. The smaller Dogman immediately started scrambling up the ravine wall, climbing fast, clearly deciding this fight wasn't worth it. The larger one got back to its feet, shaking its head, but you could see the fight had gone out of it. It backed up slowly, keeping its eyes on the Bigfoot. Then it too turned and climbed up the ravine wall. Both of them reached the top and disappeared into the forest without looking back. The Bigfoot stood there for a long moment, watching them go, making sure they were really leaving. Then it turned around and looked at me. I was still standing there with my rifle, though I'd lowered it at some point during the confrontation without even realizing it. We were maybe 6 feet apart. I could see every detail of its face, and what struck me most was how human the eyes looked. Brown eyes, not yellow like the Dogman, with what looked like actual thought and emotion behind them. We just looked at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. I didn't move, didn't speak, barely breathed. I had no idea what was going to happen next, whether it had saved me from the Dogman only to finish me off itself. But it just stood there, looking at me with those very human eyes, and I could swear I saw something in them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Then it did something I still can't fully explain. It raised one hand, and yes, it had hands with fingers and an opposable thumb, not paws, and pointed up the canyon in the direction it had come from. The gesture was unmistakable. It was showing me a way out, telling me to leave. The movement was deliberate, intentional, and clearly communicative. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was a thinking being making a conscious choice to help me. I nodded slowly, trying to show I understood. The Bigfoot lowered its hand, watched me for another moment, then turned and started walking up the canyon in the direction it had pointed. It didn't run, didn't rush, just walked away with this smooth, powerful gait that covered ground faster than it looked like it should. After maybe 20 yards, it looked back over its shoulder at me one more time. I took that as my cue. I started following it, keeping my distance, rifle held low but ready. The Bigfoot led me out of the canyon system. It never got too far ahead, always seemed to be checking that I was still following, occasionally stopping to look back. After maybe half a mile, the canyon opened up and we emerged into a more open forest. The Bigfoot stopped at the edge of the tree line, turned to face me one more time, and made a low vocalization. Not aggressive, almost gentle. Then it stepped into the thicker trees and was gone. Just vanished into the forest, like it had never been there at all. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. A Bigfoot had saved my life, had deliberately intervened when those Dogman creatures were about to attack me, had fought them off, and then had shown me the way to safety. Not because it had to, but because it chose to. I looked around, half expecting to see it watching me from the shadows, but there was nothing. Just forest and the sound of wind in the trees. I checked my GPS and found I was about 3 miles from where I'd left my camp set up. The Bigfoot had led me on a roundabout route, probably avoiding the territory where those Dogmen were hunting. I hiked back to my camp as fast as I could, packed up everything in record time, and started the long hike back to my truck. I didn't stop to rest, didn't stop to eat, just kept moving, wanting to put as much distance as possible between me and that area. It took me about 4 hours to get back to the trailhead. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way, kept listening for those howls or for any sign I was being followed. But I didn't see or hear anything unusual, just normal forest sounds, normal wildlife. When I finally reached my truck and threw my pack in the bed, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine. My hands were still shaking. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened that day. I've replayed it in my mind hundreds of times, trying to make sense of it, trying to fit it into some kind of rational framework. The thing is, there's no way to rationalize what I saw. Those creatures were real. The Dogmen were real. The Bigfoot was real. And what happened in that canyon was real. For the first few weeks after it happened, I questioned my own memories. Wondered if maybe I'd been more scared than I realized, if my mind had taken something explainable and twisted it into something impossible. Maybe they were just bears. Maybe my fear and exhaustion had made them look bigger and stranger than they really were. But then I'd remember specific details that couldn't be explained away. The way the Dogmen moved on 2 legs with that distinctive canine gait. The way they coordinated their howls to communicate. The human intelligence in the Bigfoot's eyes when it looked at me. I went back to my photos of those massive canine tracks I'd found. Looked at them on my computer screen where I could zoom in and examine every detail. They weren't bear tracks. They weren't wolf tracks. They were something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist according to known zoology. I sent them to a few wildlife experts without telling them where or when they were taken. Got back a lot of confused responses. Nobody could identify what made them. One expert flat out told me they had to be fake, that no known animal had that combination of size and structure. I tried researching Dogman sightings online and found more than I expected. Reports going back decades from all across the country, but especially concentrated in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest. People describing massive wolf-like creatures that walked upright, that showed intelligence beyond normal animals, that sometimes hunted humans. The descriptions matched what I'd seen perfectly. The height, the build, the way they moved, the coordinated hunting behavior. It was all there in these reports from people who had no connection to each other. The Bigfoot research was easier to find, more mainstream if you can call any cryptid research mainstream. But most of the accounts I found described peaceful encounters, creatures that avoided confrontation, that seemed curious about humans, but preferred to keep their distance. I found very few accounts of Bigfoot actively intervening to help humans, and even fewer describing confrontations between Bigfoot and other cryptid species. That made what I'd witnessed seem even more unusual, even more significant. The Dogmen were hunting me. They were coordinating their attack, working together with a level of intelligence and planning that you don't see in regular predators. They had me cornered, trapped in that ravine with no way out, and they were moving in for the kill. I don't know what would have happened if the Bigfoot hadn't shown up. Actually, I do know. I wouldn't be here telling this story. Those dogmen would have torn me apart. But the Bigfoot did show up, and it made a choice to intervene. It could have just watched from a distance, could have let nature take its course. But instead, it positioned itself between me and immediate danger, confronted two extremely dangerous predators, and drove them off. Then it showed me the way to safety. Those are the actions of a thinking, reasoning being, not an animal acting on instinct. I think there's some kind of conflict between these species. The way the Bigfoot responded when it heard those vocalizations, the way it immediately moved to intercept the dogmen, the way it drove them off, that wasn't just random. That felt like there was history there, like this was a continuation of something that had been going on for a long time. Maybe the Bigfoot protect their territory from the dogmen. Maybe they compete for the same resources. Maybe there's some deeper conflict I can't even begin to understand. What I do know is that the Bigfoot made a conscious choice to help a human. It recognized I was in danger, and it acted to protect me. That tells me these creatures are not only intelligent, but also capable of empathy, of understanding another being's distress and choosing to help. That's remarkable. That's something that deserves respect and protection. The dogmen are a different story. Those creatures were pure predators. Intelligent predators, coordinated and calculating, but predators nonetheless. They saw me as prey, and they hunted me like wolves hunt elk, using tactics and teamwork. The way they moved, the way they communicated, the way they cut off my escape routes, all of it showed a level of planning and intelligence that was terrifying. These aren't cryptids to be wondered about or searched for. These are apex predators that see humans as food. What strikes me most about the dogman encounter is how calculated it all was. They didn't just chase me randomly. They herded me deliberately toward that ravine, boxing me in from three sides, forcing me to go exactly where they wanted me to go. That dead-end ravine was probably a killing ground they'd used before, a place where the terrain gave them every advantage. They'd done this to other prey, probably done it many times, perfected their technique through experience. The howls they used weren't just expressions of aggression or excitement. They were communication, a language of sorts. Each howl served a specific purpose, coordinating positions, signaling movements, warning each other about obstacles or changes in the hunt. That's not instinct. That's learned behavior, cultural knowledge passed down through generations. It suggests these creatures have social structures, family groups that hunt together and teach their young sophisticated tactics. But the Bigfoot showed something different. Where the dogman showed predatory intelligence, the Bigfoot showed what I can only call wisdom. It assessed the situation, recognized I was in immediate danger, made a decision to intervene, and then executed that decision with precise timing. It didn't attack recklessly. It positioned itself strategically, used intimidation first, and only resorted to physical violence when the dogman forced the issue. And after driving them off, it ensured I could escape safely, rather than just leaving me to figure it out on my own. That pointing gesture, showing me the direction to safety, that's what I keep coming back to. That wasn't instinct or trained behavior. That was communication, deliberate and unmistakable. The Bigfoot knew I needed to leave the area, and it showed me how to do it safely. It understood my vulnerability, understood that I was lost and confused, and took action to remedy that. That shows a level of cognitive ability and empathy that goes beyond what we typically attribute to animals. I've thought a lot about why the Bigfoot intervened. It didn't know me, had no obligation to help, could have simply watched from a distance or moved on entirely. But it chose to place itself in danger to protect me from a very real threat. The dogmen were formidable opponents, as the subsequent fight proved. The Bigfoot could have been injured or even killed if things had gone differently. Yet it took that risk for a human it had never met and would probably never see again. Maybe there's some kind of territorial conflict between Bigfoot and Dogman that I stumbled into. Maybe the Bigfoot wasn't helping me specifically, but rather driving Dogman out of its territory, and I just happened to benefit from that. Or maybe Bigfoot have some kind of ethical code, some sense of right and wrong that compels them to protect weaker beings from predators. I don't know which is true, and maybe I'll never know. But regardless of the motivation, the result was the same: my life was saved. I haven't been back to that area. I don't plan to go back. I got lucky once because a Bigfoot happened to be nearby and decided to intervene. I'm not counting on getting lucky a second time. That forest belongs to things that are bigger and stronger and smarter than I gave them credit for, and I'm done pretending I'm at the top of the food chain out there. I still hunt, but I've changed how I do it. I don't go as deep into the backcountry anymore. I stick to areas closer to roads and trails. I'm more careful about the sounds I hear and the signs I see. And I pay attention when something feels wrong, when that instinct kicks in telling you something isn't right. That instinct kept our ancestors alive for thousands of years, and it saved my life that day in the ravine. I should have listened to it sooner. The gear I carry has changed too. I bring more ammunition now, keep a round chambered when I'm in unfamiliar territory, carry a sidearm in addition to my rifle. I've upgraded my communication equipment, invested in a satellite messenger that can send distress signals even where there's no cell coverage. I don't camp in isolated areas anymore. If I'm going to be out overnight, I make sure I'm somewhere I can get help if I need it, somewhere within reasonable distance of other people. My hunting buddies have noticed the changes. They've commented on how I've become more cautious, more paranoid in their words. I don't go into details about why. I tell them I had a close call with a bear, leave it vague enough that they don't press for details. I don't think they'd believe the truth anyway, and I'm not sure I want to convince them. The fewer people who go looking for these creatures, the better for everyone involved. Sometimes when I'm out in the woods now, I catch myself scanning the tree line differently, looking for shapes that don't belong, movements that seem too deliberate, signs that something large and intelligent is watching. Every snapped branch makes me alert. Every strange sound makes me stop and listen. I've become hypervigilant in a way I never was before that day. Some people might call it paranoia. I call it learning from experience. The worst part is the dreams. I still have them sometimes, 2 or 3 times a month. I'm back in that ravine, watching those dogmen climb down toward me, feeling that absolute certainty that I'm about to die. Sometimes in the dreams, the Bigfoot doesn't show up. Sometimes it shows up, but loses the fight. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, taking several minutes to convince myself I'm safe in my own bed. The fear feels just as real as it did that day, even months later. I'm sharing this story because people need to understand what's out there. The deep wilderness isn't just home to deer and elk and bears. There are other things living in those forests, things that have learned to stay hidden from humans, things that are smart enough and strong enough to be extremely dangerous if you wander into their territory. The dogmen are real. They hunt in packs, they coordinate their attacks, and they see humans as potential prey. But Bigfoot are also real. And from what I experienced, they're not the monsters people imagine. The creature that saved my life showed intelligence, showed decision-making ability, and showed what I can only describe as compassion. It recognized I was in danger from a different predator, and it chose to help. That's not animal behavior. That's something more. If you're out in the deep wilderness and you hear howls that don't sound quite right, howls that sound too human or too coordinated, get out of the area. Don't investigate. Don't try to get closer. Don't try to prove anything. Just leave. Because those could be dogmen, and if they are, you don't want to meet them. Trust your instincts. Trust that feeling of being watched or that sudden silence in the forest. Those are warnings, and they're worth listening to. Pay attention to the animal behavior around you. If the birds suddenly go quiet, if deer start moving erratically for no apparent reason, If you see elk bolting from an area without cause, that's information. That's the wildlife telling you something dangerous is nearby. They've survived by being attuned to threats we can't see or hear, and their reactions are worth heeding. I ignored those signs because I was focused on hunting, and it almost cost me my life. Watch for unusual tracks. If you see prints that don't match any animal you can identify, especially if they show intelligence in how they're placed or where they lead, take them seriously. Don't rationalize them away as misidentified bears or unusual weather conditions creating weird impressions. Those tracks might be the only warning you get before you wander into territory where you're not wanted, where you're seen as an intruder, or worse, as prey. Be especially cautious at night. Both the Dogman and the Bigfoot seem to be primarily nocturnal, or at least more active during low-light conditions. If you're camping in remote areas, keep your camp secure. Keep a fire going if possible. Keep your gear organized so you can leave quickly if needed, and always know which direction leads back to civilization. Don't assume that being in a tent or having a gun makes you safe. Those creatures are strong enough and smart enough to overcome both if they want to. Never travel alone in very remote areas if you can avoid it. I know that contradicts my own practice, but that's exactly my point. I learned this lesson the hard way. Groups are safer because these predators seem to prefer isolated targets. There's safety in numbers, just like there has been throughout human history. Our ancestors didn't survive by being lone wolves. They survived by staying together, by watching out for each other, by sharing information about threats. If you do encounter something that might be a Dogman or a Bigfoot, don't try to approach it for a closer look or to get photos. Don't call out to it or try to communicate. Just slowly back away while keeping it in sight. Don't run unless you're being actively chased, and get out of the area as quickly and safely as possible. Running triggers chase instincts in predators, so only run if you're already in immediate danger. Otherwise, controlled retreat is your best option. I owe my life to a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, believe me, but it's the truth. I was seconds away from being killed, and only the intervention of a creature that supposedly doesn't exist saved me. I saw it clearly. I watched it fight. I followed it to safety. It was real, and what it did was deliberate and intentional. The wilderness is bigger and more mysterious than most people realize. There are things living in the deepest forests that science hasn't cataloged, creatures that have survived by staying hidden and avoiding human contact. I met 2 different species of those creatures on the same day, and one tried to kill me while the other saved my life. That experience changed everything I thought I knew about what's possible. What happened to me in those Idaho mountains wasn't unique. I've heard from other hunters and hikers since then, people who've had similar experiences, but were too afraid to share them publicly. Stories of close calls with creatures that shouldn't exist, encounters that left them shaken and changed. Most of them never reported what they saw because they knew how it would be received, knew they'd be dismissed as crazy or attention-seeking. I understand that reluctance completely. So when people ask me if I believe in Bigfoot, I tell them I don't believe I know. I've seen one up close enough to see the expression in its eyes, close enough to watch it make conscious choices. And when they ask me why I don't go back to try to prove it or get evidence, I tell them the truth. I don't go back because I'm smart enough to know when I've been given a gift. That Bigfoot could have ignored me, could have let the Dogman finish what they started. But it didn't. It saved me and showed me the way out. I'm not going to repay that kindness by leading people back to that area, by bringing attention and cameras and hunters. I'm going to respect what happened, respect the choice that creature made, and respect its right to live in peace in those forests. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some truths are better left unproven. I know what I saw, and that's enough. That day in the ravine taught me that humans aren't alone at the top of the food chain. We like to think we are, like to think our intelligence and our tools make us invincible. But out there in the deep wilderness, where civilization ends and true wildness begins, there are creatures that are stronger than us, smarter than we give them credit for, and perfectly adapted to an environment where we're just visitors. The Dogman proved that by hunting me with tactics I couldn't counter. The Bigfoot proved it by saving me with a strength and intelligence I still can't fully comprehend. I'm alive because of something that most people don't believe exists. I'm alive because a Bigfoot made a choice. And I'm telling this story because people deserve to know that the wilderness is more complex and more dangerous than they realize, but also that not everything unknown is hostile. Some things, even things we don't understand, can show mercy and compassion. The Bigfoot that saved my life proved that. I'll never forget it, and I'll never stop being grateful for what it did.